Hi, this is Kessel Fikowski, and today we are going to be getting into talking about the various colonies, especially the establishment of the Jamestown colony, along with the establishment of the Plymouth colony. And you'll see that the dates here go from 1607 to 1754, which is basically the eve of the French and Indian War. So that date, of course, is no accident. And here you see Key Concept 2.1, and really what you're going to be seeing amongst the early colonizers, that being the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, and the English, is that they all, to some extent, had differences in the goals in terms of their settlements. They also are going to have different cultures, as well as interacting differently with the North American environment. And, of course, this is going to lead to diverse patterns of colonization. And you'll see some of the big ideas listed below here for period 2. All right, so let's look at Spain in terms of their control in the New World, and certainly they're going to be characterized as having very, very strict control. Of course, its primary motivation, similar to other countries, is to make money, hence glory, God, and gold, but gold, of course, being one of the more pressing motivations. But it will certainly exercise strict control, especially over the Native Americans through their mission system. And that's to say that they not only want complete control throughout their domain, but they also want to convert the Native Americans. And we see this through the mission system, which we talked about in previous screencasts. And they're going to be trying to get labor out of the Native Americans, as we've also discussed, through the encomienda system, which eventually will go to the wayside with Las Casas trying to end that. But nevertheless, it's going to allow them to essentially accomplish glory, God, and gold for the Spanish Empire. And again, they were characterized by being fairly strict. It's not to say that there won't be some mixing between the Spanish and the Native Americans, but really their relations are not going to be the best. Certainly, it's not going to be as bad as the English, as we'll find out in subsequent discussions. However, the French and Dutch are going to be a little bit different in their treatment in comparison to the Spanish and English. The French are going to intermarry a lot more, and one reason for that is, remember, they're here to make money, just like the Spanish. However, they're not looking for war. One thing about war is that it tends to have very damaging effects for economies. So they're not looking to create war or have hostile relationships. They're looking for money. And they're going to form these unions with Native peoples, creating people of mixed race, of Native American descent, depending on the tribe that they belong in, and, of course, of having French descent. And again, at the end of the day for the French, they want trade first and foremost. And we see this, for example, with the Coureurs des Bois, which were these French fur traders. These are people looking for beaver furs in the 1600s. And, fur is extremely popular in Europe at this point. So they're going to be building alliances with Native Americans. And it's no accident that when we eventually get to the French and Indian War, well, guess what? The French and the Native Americans are going to be on the same side. They're already establishing these very, very good relationships. And in many cases, you see intermarriage. So consequently, the French are going to have a much better relationship. And the Dutch are going to do similar things as the French. They're going to build trade routes in what will be today modern-day New York and New Jersey. They're going to have good relations with the Native Americans as well. Now, when we look at the English, well, the English are going to be a little bit different, right? The English colonies are not so much based on fur. It's going to be much more based on agriculture. And they're going to be characterized by having a large number of immigrants and having very hostile relations with the Native Americans. There's going to be a number of conflicts here, as we will get into in subsequent screencasts with the Powhatans, Bacon's Rebellion, the Pequot War, King Philip's War. Again, we will get to that later on. However, the English are not going to have very good relations. And certainly with the influx of English immigrants, that's going to bring on further conflict, and that's going to come about through the headright system as well with very wealthy immigrants. Again, we will get into that in a subsequent screencast in period 2. But nevertheless, as you see on this wonderful map here, in the blue, you do have the English colonies here. To the north, you have where you're going to see the French colonies, known as New France at this point. You see the Spanish, of course, getting early in on the action and dominating a lot of Central America, as well as modern-day Mexico and the tips of South America as well. And in between, sort of sandwiched in between, you have the Dutch splitting the English colonies. Of course, that will not last too long, but nevertheless, you see a lot of Spanish domination, and you even see it creeping into what is today modern-day Florida as well. And here's again another look here, as by 1750, we're not that far away from the American Revolutionary War, but the French colonies are expanding throughout the modern-day United States into the west here along the Mississippi River, and they did this through a system of forts. You will also note the Spanish are also extending their influence into the southwest in modern-day United States. You'll also note that by this time, the English will have the 13 colonies already established. The Dutch will go to the wayside, so New Netherlands will be rather quick and done with quite early, as the Dutch will eventually cede that to the English, to the Duke of York, hence the name for New York being New York, after the Duke of York. All right, so let's get into the first permanent colony. As you'll note that the first attempt of a colony by the English is the Roanoke colony, which is going to fail. It's known as the Lost Colony. And Jamestown is only about 150 miles north of Roanoke in Virginia. And you'll see this is a depiction of Jamestown in this triangular-looking dwelling. But certainly Jamestown is going to be founded on the promise of a joint stock company, as investors are going to pool their wealth hoping to make a profit. And ultimately, if you were an investor, you would set aside a set of money and hoping that, of course, you're going to find gold and that you will have a certain percentage shared with you. This ultimately is going to form a private entity known as the Virginia Company, which was done at the pleasure of King James, hence the name Jamestown. Now, John Smith is going to be the first leader, and with any new colony, especially during these times in the 1600s, you don't really know what you're getting into. You don't have modern technology. You don't have those modern luxuries. So you're not really so sure about the environment. And of course, this is going to prove extremely difficult for these 150 colonists making their way into Jamestown. And of course, this is known for their very, very disastrous start on a number of levels. Captain John Smith is warning of disaster. He can see that the water is bad. It's poisoning people. You see that these people who are coming to Jamestown are not laborers. They are people from wealthy backgrounds. They're not used to laborious work back in England, and they're focused primarily on gold. So this is going to lead to Smith saying the famous, "He that will not work shall not eat." So again, think about the problems here. You need to be able to grow something. The colonists are not used to any of this hard labor. This is, again, not going to end all that well. Now, they will get some assistance from the Powhatan Native Americans, but this will be rather short-lived. Again, keep in mind you're talking about 150 colonists, and soon that's going to expand to more than 600 colonists. The Powhatans are going to be growing sick and tired of this. Yes, we are feeding ourselves and a few colonists, but now hundreds more. As you will imagine, things are going to be getting a lot more tense. And in 1609, the winter is actually rather rough, and the colonists are going to have to resort to eating rats, snakes, shoe leather as a result of the famine that's going to come about. And there are even reports of cannibalism. Of course, this is of dead bodies already, but think about how desperate you have to be if you're going to be resorting to eating dead people. And certainly the numbers tell how awful this particular winter was, as out of the more than 600 colonists that arrive, only 60 are going to survive. So it looks like Jamestown is on the brink of failure until brown gold will later save the colony. And you probably know that brown gold stands for tobacco. Yes, we're not talking about a different type of gold being brown. We are talking about tobacco. And John Rolfe is going to come into the Jamestown colony, and he's going to cultivate tobacco through crossbreeding from actually Brazilian tobacco along with local Native American variety in 1612. This is a high-quality hybrid, and soon enough, England will begin to get addicted to the 1.5 million pounds of tobacco that is being exported annually. That's just in 1 year. And as I said, the British are going to be becoming very much addicted. And as you can imagine, more and more tobacco it will be exported. Now, when we talk about self-government in Virginia, right, we had We have the Jamestown colony here, but we're going to begin to see the seeds of democracy take root in 1619, even though we do not formulate our Constitution for many, many, many more years. In particular, the House of Burgesses is going to be established, giving people some power. And then just 2 years later, the Ordinances for Virginia will be particularly important in 1621, as it's now giving the people actual power in the House of Burgesses, basically stating that the Virginia Company could not pass any law without the consent of the House of Burgesses, again, made up of local colonists. So this is going to be very much an early foray into self-government. And again, think about how much more advanced Jamestown and the Virginia colony is becoming as a result of brown tobacco. And again, they were just literally on the brink of failure not that long ago. So let's go into the Plymouth colony. As you'll note that Plymouth is in the northeast, much farther away from Virginia today. And of course, the Puritans are, of course, going to be blown off course. These Puritans are looking to purify a place and leave England, and they end up in Plymouth. And of course, you'll have the famous Mayflower Compact, as we'll talk about just in a little bit. And what's interesting is the colonists in Plymouth think they are actually in northern Virginia. They knew about Jamestown, and they thought they were just joining these people on the northern end, despite the fact that they were considerably far from modern-day Virginia. Quite funny to think about that based on our modern conception. But nevertheless, self-government is, very much dominant here. And we especially see this in the Mayflower Compact, right? This is going to be about self-government, and this is going to come from God and the King. And this is huge. And it's, of course, much shorter when you look at the Ordinances of Virginia. And you'll also note that the use of God is going to come up numerous times compared to the Ordinances of Virginia, which I think only mention God once and is much, much longer. But nevertheless, they do share a similar purpose of setting a form of self-government in the new colony. And that is the huge takeaway from the Mayflower Compact, that even though there are many, many overtones of religion, you're going to, of course, see that self-government is a dominant theme. So as a result, Puritans are on their own. They've entered into this new continent. They're in this new world with this new compact. And they do elect a commander of the colony, being, of course, Miles Standish, as you see pictured here. And he is, again, going to sort of represent this idea of self-government that's going to be taking an early hold in America. And when you look at our Constitution, it just didn't pop out of the blue, right? The idea of the Ordinances of Virginia and the House of Burgesses and the Mayflower Compact, right? Those are the seeds for eventually the idea of self-government that are going to be embedded into our U.S. Constitution. It is part of our country's heritage, and we can trace it back to early colonial settlements.